All right,
There
we're
we go.
here. We're live with Nick Nemeroff, ladies and gentlemen. Wow, give it up to the thousands here in the Zoom call, the millions watching at home.
Yeah.
Hi, Nick. Welcome.
What's up, Jonathan? How are you? Thank you for having me.
Of course. We're so excited to talk to you. All right, so my standard first question is what comedy stuff, and just talk a little bit about what you were doing, obviously pre-COVID, and what your day was like, what you were working on, and what have you been working on and or doing since COVID happened, because obviously that's like the only way to contextualize the world.
Right. So before COVID, I had been in LA for like just under a year. So I had moved down there with really trying to, I've been doing comedy about 6.5 years in Toronto, Canada, which was great. But then I sort of had to get acclimated to the scene. I kind of had to restart in comedy in terms of like, I had, was lucky to have like good credits and stuff, but until you kind of maybe prove it to other people, that's, the best way to get booked on shows and stuff. So I was kind of like, had restarted at the bottom and then was working my way up back towards like a spot in the scene. And then, was sort of continually working on like writing and acting stuff as much as I could. And then COVID hit, and then all of stand-up obviously went on pause until, who knows, maybe forever. But I just recorded an album in December, and so there was pretty fortunate timing, because once COVID hit, I could just really focus on like, putting that all together and releasing that and trying to get some, listens and some coverage on it and stuff. And since then, I'd say just more working now on writing and trying to pitch shows to networks in the US and here.
Awesome. Yeah. The pursuit, shameless plug for you, The Pursuit of Comedy Ruined My Life. Very relatable title.
Yeah, there you go.
And yeah, I mean, I think to talk a little bit about what your like career was like in Toronto, and the big question everyone always wonders, of course, is the financial side of it. What is that like, making money as a comedian? But you don't have to get too much in the weeds there. But also, I'd also love to hear about this sort of process of working your way up, because it seems like you've now done that in 2 different places. So I'm sure you have some insight on that as well.
Yeah. So in terms of working my way up, which is, tied to the financial side as well, I think only last like 2 years was the first time I ever like made, anything even like remotely, like even like double digit in terms of like, like that amount of money where it could be like, okay, I feel like there's some sort of payoff for doing comedy, kind of. And there's not a lot of there's just no money in stand-up, and then it comes in like lump sums sometimes if you're like headlining or doing festivals or doing TV tapings and stuff. So it's pretty conducive to like a drug addict's personality or something, where you just like get a bunch of something and then you feel like you have a shitload for a long time, and then it just goes away and you're like, fuck, I need another hit of that as much as possible, as soon as possible. But I think also what I also learned in Canadian comedy, at least, is releasing an album and getting it played on Sirius XM is actually the way a lot of like touring comics and they like are able to supplement their livelihood with those kinds of checks from Sound Exchange, which is pays you per play per track on those radio stations and stuff. So that's kind of a hidden secret that I only learned later on in comedy. It's like, oh, this is how so many comedians are able to not have a day job and are able to like tour pretty consistently and stuff, and just sort of have this passive income that is all the work you put into it, which you weren't getting paid for it necessarily when you were doing it.
Sure.
but now you put it on the CD and then it gets played and you're like, okay, now I'm sort of reaping the rewards of, 5 years of not really making much money off of it.
That's cool. Yeah. That's definitely interesting. And everyone will have to play the album, both because it's hilarious, but also, to pay you back for coming to our Q&A. I'll play through.
Right. That's why I just want everybody to I'm just trying to get my album out there, man.
Yeah.
That's the main goal of this.
Obviously. I wanted to ask about, like, your style is obviously a very, like, deadpan. I don't want to say low energy, because that feels like it has a negative connotation, which I obviously don't mean at all. Like, I love your stand-up, but it's like you have that unique style, and I'm just curious. Obviously, that's like partially sort of just what your personality is and the way you talk, but I'm just curious to dig into like how that develops over time. Do you put on more of that for a stage persona? I'm just really curious, because obviously it's sort of a unique type of stand-up.
Yeah, I think it's been a process of me figuring it out over the years. It was always the kind of comedy that I really liked. More so was like the slow deadpan and like sort of, meta wordplay, all that kind of stuff. That I also noticed the more, like, when I got into going into open mics at the very beginning of my, comedy pursuit and stuff, I just like would go, the classic thing of doing like, 20, 30 shows in a week in Toronto and just like seeing a million comics, most of them brutal.
Right.
But you would see so many, I just like couldn't believe how many of them were just like exactly the same. And it just seemed so obvious to me to like do the opposite of that. And then that really ended up sticking out. And again, it was like, I was definitely copying some comedians that I really looked up to and stuff at the beginning, especially.
Yeah, I think everyone does.
Totally. It's like a trope of like comedians on podcasts kind of saying that, because it's just how it is.
That's and it's the kind of art where there's no like hard and fast rules. You kind of have to see what other people are doing and kind of figure out what works. Yeah.
Totally. And so I remember one night it just like clicked in that I like really got on that persona, because I was always doing those kinds of jokes of like sort of deadpan, but I was new to performing in general, so I was more nervous, so I was saying it quick. And then one time just like everything kind of fell into place, and I just like truly, I also hated the audience that night, because it was all like kids, similar truly probably to your USC crew. It was like I went to a university here called Ryerson, but it was like all kids. I was in this like comedy sketch group, but we had a stand-up night, so it was all kids from my program who were in the audience, and they were just like so rowdy, and I was like curmudgeonly and like annoyed, but like used that to like, I don't know, it just all kind of fell into place, and I felt like I had finally delivered stand-up the way I wanted to deliver it, which was like I had the power by being slow and deliberate and like making you guys have to listen to me rather than like me being scared and trying to like please you,
And I do think that especially works when you have really, really clever like wordplay punchlines. Like, I'm willing to wait, an extra 10 seconds because I know that punch is going to be like, oh, that's, how
that's
I've never thought of that.
Yeah, if you don't have the payoff, it for sure can backfire. And then the crowd, will only give you so much of their actual time if it's not worth their energy of listening,
Right. Yeah. So it's also definitely a writing thing.
Yeah, and I just loved again those kinds of jokes. And
yeah, I'm thinking of like, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna, just like what like you said of like I wouldn't have like got to like that punchline or something, because I think that happens a lot in comedy where you're like, especially if you're a comedian, you're trying to guess the punchline when you hear the setup of the comedian on stage. And so I think like realizing that and then trying to get to like, not the obvious punchline.
And when, as a comic, when you guess it and then they say exactly what you guessed, you're like, oh, that's not great.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. When it's a comedian who does something that you weren't expecting and it's so funny, you're like, fuck, that was so, like,
right.
that is like, yeah, that's what I love about comedy.
No, yeah, totally. So I'm curious to dig into like some of those people that you were looking up to and trying to ape, because I mean, just offhand, I would like, I think you like Sam Morrill is a guy who kind of writes similarly to you, like in terms of the wordplay style,
Right.
maybe. And then I think of Dimitri Martin as well in terms of that like more reserved style, but also
Yeah.
really, really clever. So I'm just curious, what other comics do you love? Who are you, listening to, watching currently and in the
Yeah.
past?
Well, Dimitri Martin definitely was like huge for me growing up, and Mitch Hedberg was, I would say,
Of
by
course,
far
yeah.
the most. Like the person who I was just like, this is the funniest, and just like the jokes that would get stuck in your head, and I was like, fuck, I couldn't stop thinking about how funny that was.
Right.
Um, so those guys, and Todd Barry as well, another like smooth, like deadpan, but like so funny, and like again use like silence and tension really well to like make it so much funnier when he's like, we'll just say it's not even the punchline is like the cleverest or whatever thing. It's just so cutting and funny and how dry he says it.
Yeah, totally.
And then when I moved to Toronto, I found this like comedy show here called Last Sabbath, which was like if you guys ever have seen like Nathan For You and Nathan Fielder, like he
Huge.
was part of this collective that still even does shows. I mean, pre-COVID, I guess, but they still do shows every week, and it's still like the best show I've ever seen. Every time I see it, it's the most fun, and like all the comedians in that, I would like really was awestruck by and really looked up to. So like there's this guy Tom Henry who is like also very like deadpan and like wordplay and in that same vibe of those guys you were mentioning before. And Chris Locke, who's another amazing comedian in Toronto. Unfortunately, what happens in Canadian show business is all these people are like the most hilarious, unique people, but nobody knows them because it's Canadian showbiz. But if you take my word for it, if you looked up
Yeah,
Tom
no,
Henry or Chris
I
Locke, they're
do.
great people.
All right, last thing I have before we open it up and talk more with all the tons and tons of people, dozens.
Yeah, I see about 1,000 faces over here.
Yeah, it's a
I'm going to be honest. I'm going to keep it only to like 2 or 3 other people, if that's cool.
Yeah,
but
no,
I know
we
that
can.
there's a bunch
Yeah,
of
sure,
other people in the chat.
We don't want to like. Yeah, okay, that's a good idea.
I don't want to like overwhelm it.
No, good call. So I wanted to say, obviously, you have some experience with like festivals, being on Conan on TV, doing TV sets, and you said you're now like working on selling scripts to TV and stuff and networks and stuff like that. So I'm just curious on your insight of working with TV in mind, or submitting out to these things. Like, what do you, what are your thoughts on that? And I mean, also, are you represented, or like how does that work for you personally?
Yeah. So again, I like don't necessarily. I don't know if this is like, I wouldn't say this is the way to do it. This is just like how it happened for me, and is, I think for every person it kind of works differently. And I think again, being in Canada, all that stuff seems so far away and was like not applicable. So I think if you're actually in LA or in the States, it's like already much more attainable, and I feel like more practical probably. But the way it worked for me to get representation was I did a open mic at this comedy club in Toronto called Absolute Comedy, and there used to be a San Francisco like comedy website called Rooftop Comedy, and for some reason they were filming this open mic, and then a guy who was part of Rooftop Comedy contacted me, and he's like, hey, I really liked your set that I saw. We were filming this mic, and would you mind if I sent it to a friend of mine who I think would be interested too, who was like a manager in LA? I was like, oh my God, of course. It was like a definite sort of right place, right time scenario.
Sure.
And then yeah, we me and him kind of hit it off and are still working together as like a manager, and he reps me. And then in terms of like working with TV in mind, I think that's good to do if you're like getting close to that you know, part of your career or whatever. I think if you're starting, or at least like for me, I was just like wanting to like be my own favorite comedian, I would say, is like maybe the way you can even stick out more, and like just trying to get like, I don't think I was ever working on like the perfect like 5-minute set for TV that's like TV clean and all that kind of stuff. I think it was just like, what would make me laugh the most, and like what was I not seeing other comedians, or like what was I seeing so much of that I just like had to make fun of, or just like, I can't believe so many people are doing this one thing, and like nobody has like brought up that we're all doing this exact same bit, which was like on the one of the bits that I did on Conan, which was like I read off my hand very quickly as if like I'm doing crowd work, or like I'm asking people if they're dating, and it's just like very comes from watching a comedian, or you know, thousands of comedians do that same basic thing, but it's like every single person is doing this. It was insane.
Millions, it feels like. Yeah, we talked about that before with like the I don't know if you know Drew Landry, but we were talking with him a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about like that whole meta level of comedy where your jokes become jokes about like the people at your open mic, and like, you know, or just
that can be
the same three, like, are you guys on the apps premises, you know, like just like
exactly. It's insane how how just often you would see that happen, kind of.
All right, so anyone out there in the crowd who wants to raise their hand with the raise hand button and ask a question, I'll try to find you in this long list of participants so you can
try to fit
talk to Nick. It's going to be a lot of scrolling, so go ahead. I see Daniel Flores unmuted.
Yeah, hey Nick. I wanted to ask about your writing habits, like especially when you started out versus like right before the quarantine, right before the pandemic hit, because obviously like it's a little different now. But like when you were starting to take your comedy career seriously, what were your writing habits? Like how much were you writing? Did you have any like strict goals you were trying to meet a day? And how much were you taking that out and performing?
I never had like strict rules. I had maybe different points where I was like, okay, this week I'm gonna go to a coffee shop, write 2 hours every day, and like use one of these jokes at least at a mic tonight, kind of. But like I never kept up with that more than, you know, a week at a time, kind of. And I feel like I just like am never not thinking of stand up or like stand up jokes or, you know, tweets or anything like that. So it was kind of like an hour maybe before mic started, I would like go to a coffee shop or the bar that the mic was at or something, and like come up with my set list for that that night. And then I think by doing it as much as possible and going out to mics as much as possible, put pressure on me to come up with new stuff as much as possible. But I never had like a set routine of like, get up at this time, go write this much today or anything like that. It was kind of more like ethereal, and like just my whole thing was like, if I just do open mics all the time, I will come up with material that way, kind of.
Yeah. Cool way to look at it. Shoot, I had something I wanted to add on to that, but I forgot what it was.
Sorry, we have a lot of people who want to ask questions. We don't have any time to waste, Daniel.
Oh, shoot. Okay, I'll just leave.
I'm just kidding. But yeah, if anyone else wants to.
Oh, shit.
I can ask a question as the one woman here.
Yeah, let us know if you think of it.
So my question is, I'm interested in deadpan. I'm not really good at it, to be honest. As the people here know, I tend to laugh at my own jokes. So I was wondering what your advice was about deadpan comedy and how you kind of format your jokes so that you don't laugh at them?
Well, I think if you are laughing at your jokes and that's what comes naturally to you on stage, I don't think that that's like anything to avoid necessarily or anything. I think the sort of fun of like not laughing and like really drawing out silences and that kind of stuff just sort of became fun, I guess, instead of like another addition to like learning about how to perform too. That was another thing that came with like really exercising this deadpan personality on stage, I guess. And I think just by doing it a lot, I just sort of learned how to lean more into that and like how to emphasize certain words or like certain pacings and that kind of thing that could like emphasize the joke and like, it would take away, I could get more interested in that than like laughing at like the punchline that I knew was coming or something.
Yeah. And I don't know if you care what I think, but I would say that as you do your jokes more and more, you start to, you still obviously find them funny if you're doing them on stage, but it's like,
right.
I've said the same thing the same way 100 times, so I can now do it with like no affectation. If you want to move in that direction, you certainly can.
Totally,
and you don't have to, like you said, it can be part of your style, and it works a lot of times.
Yeah, you can definitely, the more you say something, I think, if you say it 1,000 times, it will be much less funny to you the 1,000th time, probably.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, I remembered what I had. If we're so, when you were writing new material and then bringing that to mics, and when you do that now too, how much of your set when you're trying out stuff would you say is new material that's like brand new or not been performed much yet? And how much of that is material that you've written a fair bit ago and that you're still working on to get it better? And how long do you usually spend working on those bits at open mics to get them to a point where you think, oh, they're ready to add into like my show?
Yeah, it certainly depends like, on the mic itself or like, that week of writing. I feel like I go through, it's like a lot of like peaks and valleys where like, okay, I have written just not even by virtue of me necessarily like trying to, but like I've come up with so much new stuff like this week and it's all working, and so I'm doing way more new stuff and just like feeling confident enough to try a new bit on like maybe a more important show that maybe the rule is like you don't do new bits on this show or whatever. But yeah, again, it's hard because I don't have like a hard and fast rule of like this is how much new stuff I'm going to do on this mic, or I wish I had better answers. I'm sorry.
I remember one time you, Brooke, and I went to a mic together, and like I have a thing, I think all comics do it, and you do too based on this story, but where like I hate doing the same material that people have already heard, especially at an open mic. And I remember you like right before you went up were like, sorry guys, like you're gonna hear some jokes that you maybe have already heard, and you like did bits that you've done before in a show, I think, to open the mic. I don't know if you were doing news, but I was like, I related to that. Like,
totally. I think
it's
always kind of like fine tuning stuff. I think maybe I realized like the joke is kind of where I want it to be, and it's like, fully formed. I don't have anything else to add to it. Like, I think that's kind of rare, and that's like with like very concise short jokes for me. And like it's like kind of figuring out like a puzzle piece or something. It's like, oh, it just kind of feels all natural and kind of feels like exactly where that should be.
Yeah. So, and sometimes, even at a mic that you maybe don't care about a ton, you still want to open with something that is gonna warm up the crowd or do well, because you want to like be
just like establish
do better.
Yeah, you want to just establish at least like some sort of like a capable comedian and you can trust me, and then maybe now I can try this newer bit that maybe is not as good as this first, sort of more solid thing that I knew was gonna work.
And I bombed at that mic with a bunch of new material I hadn't worked on. So, maybe I could learn a thing or two. Maybe I should get you in for a Q&A or something.
Yeah, exactly. I'd love to do that.
We'll find a time at some point.
That'd be great.
I have another question. So when you're forming a joke, do you have like a typical way that you do it? Do you write your jokes out on paper and then use that as a memorization for that, or do you work purely like by word of mouth and then record your sets to form them?
I definitely record all my sets like on audio. I just have whatever that app is on your iPhone. But I think to write, I'm trying to think of like coming up with like a new joke and then doing it. I think I'll like come up with the idea either like, I'm talking with a friend and like it comes up or I say it or something, or I'm just in the shower and it comes up and I say it. But I think I would like say it a bunch to like get the timing and the routine of saying it more so. And then again, testing out on stage is always the best way to do it, which is again the most like hacky comedy advice, but it's so true. And so I think like saying it into a microphone in front of people and like feeling like the energies of the crowd and like the pacing was always very big for me. So like that kind of part I couldn't really get from just like writing it down on a page. I think I had to physically like say it into a mic to like know how to say it, which is a snake eating its own tail kind of thing. But yeah.
And do you tend to be a word for word joke writer or a like key phrase, and not improvise, but something like you write down, just read my hand, and then you have what that bit is?
Right. If I'm like my set list, you mean? Like if I'm going up and like, or
yeah, I mean obviously set list is usually abbreviated, but like if you come up with an idea, is it usually in the form of like, I went to the doctor yesterday and I did this, or like doctor's appointment, comma, whatever?
Gotcha. I would usually write it down word for word. Yeah. I feel like I need like the all mapped out for me so I can like eventually get it more in my head. But like when I'm first writing it out, I do pretty word for word as much as possible.
Interesting. Yeah, because I'm definitely a shorthand guy, and maybe that can help you, especially with the finer points of if you're writing something that's like wordplay or involved in terms of the exact reasoning. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I would say most of my jokes are not very long, so writing them out word for word is like not a laborious process or anything. Yeah.
Hey, so I'm James. I joined late. Sorry. But question I have for you is like, I'm sure you've probably experienced like a dead room in the past before when it comes to like,
Oh, literally, that will never stop happening to you, unfortunately. It happens all the time. Yeah.
Do you have any tips for like dealing with that, like how to bring the energy up maybe, or just even getting through it?
Yeah, I've definitely tried out a lot of ways, whether it was like, maybe I'll bring up how bad this is going and like try to engage the room to be like, look, we all know this is going bad, but isn't that kind of funny how bad this is going? And sometimes I'll just like try to ignore it, and then that never really works, I would say. That's more just like I'm in survival mode and I'm just like, I just want to fucking finish the set and get out of here. Definitely has never like saved the set by just ignoring how bad it's going. But I think like addressing it, if you sometimes you also like come up with like, I don't have a good example of it, but like a joke that you would use in a dead room, and then like a month later you'll be in a dead room again, like maybe slip in the joke as if you just thought of it there, and it like again revives the room. So like you can have little joke callbacks or whatever that you end up realizing work to revive those kinds of situations. And again, it's just like doing it more often and like getting more experience to those even like shitty rooms. It's like, okay, that's how you kind of figure out how to deal with it, by experiencing it, I guess. It sucks to go through, but yeah, it's kind of interesting that it's part of the process. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
In terms of your set list, how it, like, I mean, obviously it would depend on the show. Like on Conan, I'm pretty sure you just stick to your type 5 or whatever, but like
Yeah.
how often does things like that happen where you have a thing in your pocket where you're like, if it goes this way or that way, I'll use this, or you're on stage live and you're like, forget this one, I'm just moving on or whatever? Like,
I think I've been more into using sort of like my like judgment in the moment, I guess, recently. I think it comes from just like trusting myself on stage and having a little bit more confidence on stage.
totally.
For example, there was actually like a TV taping in Toronto 2 days ago that I did, and like came up with a tag like that day of just like, oh, I think I had never like done it on stage before, and I was like kind of ballsy to do this in a TV taping, but I'm like, I feel like I would be mad at myself if I didn't. And I did the tag and it did not work, and I needed it. And as soon as I like said it and it got no laughs, I was like, fuck, I should not have I should have just stuck to the thing. But I think the lesson is to, I think comedy is a lot about like performing and like energy, by which I mean like the energy of like the, you and the crowd, not necessarily like a high or low energy, but it's just like this relationship that you have with the crowd. So I think if you're in the moment a lot, I think that's usually way more helpful and makes for a better performance. So I was kind of like trying to use that, like, okay, I'm in the moment and this tag is new, so it's fun to say.
Right.
And then it didn't pay off necessarily, but I'm like, I think the lesson is still to be in the moment and like,
yeah. And I think you would have, just as much as you maybe regretted it saying it because it bombed, you would have also regretted a year later if you were like, I wonder if that tag would have worked, So
100%, yeah, 100%. And it was like, I'm not gonna destroy my whole life. Hopefully, we'll see.
Nick Nemeroff canceled.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I guess a sort of similar question based on that would be like, do you have a rule when it comes to like, if you have a joke and like say it like doesn't work initially, like do you have a rule sort of for like, if it's like a 3 strikes you're out sort of thing, or if like it doesn't work 3 times when you try it, you just get rid of it?
I don't have a rule quite like that, but I definitely, because I like, will often be pretty stubborn, and I'm like, no, this is funny and you guys are wrong. But eventually, like, again, I don't have like a 3 strikes you're out kind of thing, but like, if I do it like 10, 15 times and it just like never works, I'm like, fuck, I actually think I have to give up on this. This is just not, I can't keep pretending that this is actually funny when clearly it's just not working, or I'm like not delivering it in the way I should be or something. So I need to go like retinker it, and then maybe I'll try it again. And sometimes, you can figure it out that way, but I think if you do it, I don't think that you have to have a hard and fast thing, but if you do it a lot and then it never works, maybe it's good to pack that joke in or like retool it or something. That's my awesome advice.
No, yeah, it's sorry for like the 3 strikes you're out sort of comparison. It was just the only first thing I could think of. Like,
no, of course. I think, but I do think some comedians have a policy like that, and I think that works for them too.
I've definitely heard people do that kind of thing. It's also subjective. I mean, a room can just suck.
That's the thing, yeah.
a lot of times the joke ends up sucking.
Yeah, that's why if you're like 10, 15 different rooms, different crowds, and they all don't like it, it does speak volumes about how it's probably just about the joke.
Yeah. I guess I'd like to hear a little bit. I mean, because I'm currently looking for a green card wedding, which, by the way, if you're interested, let me know. I'm just curious about your insight into the difference between the like Canada and LA comedy scenes. Is there one you like more? Is there, I don't know. Just I'm curious.
Yeah, the Toronto comedy scene, I feel like I'm sort of luckily I had moved here for school and then like started doing comedy after, and by happenstance just like found out that the Toronto comedy scene, I would say, is on par with like, the LA or New York kind of like caliber and stuff of comedy scenes. And I think the interesting thing is here is like, it's so, again, every like TV thing is so far away and feels like fantasy land, like not even a real thing that I never thought that Conan or anything like that was a realistic possibility. So maybe that, I think, made me probably never have that idea of like, oh, I'm going to work on this 5 to 7 minutes set. I'm just going to like, it just made me be like, okay, I just want to do my favorite kind of comedy or whatever. So maybe it breeds more like people who are kind of doing comedy because they, love comedy, which is not to say, obviously, you guys obviously love comedy a lot if you're doing a Q&A with a person in Toronto right now. But I think the difference is I could tell when I got to LA, it's like, oh, people like they like know what they want from their career and they're like working hard to make it happen. And I just think that was a big different scene where like the drives of why people were doing comedy were pretty different.
Interesting. Yeah, I do feel like as someone who like started in LA, it does feel sometimes at open mics that there's a lot of people who are like just waiting to sell their script or to like get in some sitcom or something, and it's a weird thing.
100%.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, those things are good and fine, and I'd be happy to have them, but I more just want to like make people laugh with my shit jokes first and foremost.
Yeah. Totally. I am so, I don't know. I would never be able to, I think, start out doing comedy in LA. It was like, it just feels so, just a different world, basically.
It's definitely crazy. And I actually kind of have, not in like the same way as like a big break, but sort of a right place, right time story where I was just at a show. I was like, oh, this is cool. And then, suddenly a year later, I'm like running that show and it's like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
So, totally. Oh, we got a late entry. This is exciting. We're keeping you on your toes. I think we're getting close to the limit of the maximum people you can have in a Zoom room. So.
Yeah, dude, that's what I want to hear. I want this thing to be fucking maxed out, VIP only.
Yeah, we charge.
I have another question.
Yeah, go for it.
Have you noticed there's the difference between when you're performing for people in front of a television versus for like a live studio audience versus when you're doing like a mic at like a comedy club? And like, if so, what is that difference like?
Yeah, I mean, let's say I've done like 1,000 comedy sets, like, only 2 or 3 have been in front of a live television audience. But from those experiences, I would say like the audience, I guess specifically like for Conan, is they're just like excited. It's weird because they're not necessarily there to see you at all, actually. They're obviously just there to see Conan. So you can kind of like bomb or do poorly. And there's like a lot of pressure, for me, it was like the most exciting thing and the first TV experience I had and everything. So there's a lot of going, and it's like, 5 p.m, and it's just like all these different things that are not actually great for comedy necessarily. I think difference, it's when you're at a club or at a comedy show or something, they're usually hopefully there to see comedy, and so they're much more into you doing jokes or whatever. And the people who are at like a late night show are like excited by like celebrities and stuff, and if you're like a new comic, you're the furthest thing from what they care about. You're just like you're like as famous as everyone in the crowd, so they're like, who are you?
Right.
Why are you getting on there? Yeah.
And I mean, people at a comedy club have drank alcohol, so that always helps.
Literally, yes, that does help a lot. Fortunately.
Trade secrets right there.
Another question. So, when it comes to like working on the like early on, like when you're sort of like grinding out initially, just like going to clubs and stuff, and obviously the situation's a bit different now with like Zoom mics and stuff for like people who are like more getting into it. Like, how do you sort of like deal with burnout that comes along with that of just constantly running and trying to keep going?
Yeah, it is definitely a thing. I think, I don't know, I feel lucky that I was and am like so stubborn, where I was just like, I can't stop, and I have like, a major like guilt complex. So I was like, if I don't do comedy tonight, I'm bad, and like everyone else is working harder than me and all these things. So I don't know if I have a good way of dealing with burnout. I think once the pandemic happened, that was like the first time. I had been doing comedy 7.5 years, and that was like the first time I'd ever gone longer than like, a week or 2 weeks without doing shows or mics or something. So I was like, oh, this is actually felt kind of nice to not do it after just like having your head in the sand for so long and just assuming there was no other way but to feel burnt out sometimes. And again, it comes similar to when I was like talking about having new material and stuff. I feel like it comes in waves where like I feel burnout, and I think what will fix that is doing another show. And then if I felt more burnout from that, I'm like, well, I think what will fix that is doing another show. So it's kind of an unhealthy addiction, I guess it would be called. But it would be eventually like I would feel re-energized by like doing well, or like getting this new joke that I really like to work. I like that's how I would find like the energy from a burnout, is like finding the same thing that I always love in comedy, is like getting the new joke or like doing well on the next show kind of thing.
Trying to think. Any more questions? We got a lot of people here. So anything else?
Yeah.
Anything? I guess just a general. I mean, you've already given a lot of advice, but just the cliche of like, what's your short advice to all the people watching at home?
So this goes out to everyone out there. Well, I think there's two great, or a piece of advice that I do remember Mitch Hedberg saying in a great interview of his. He's like, don't take anybody else's advice, which I think is true for comics, because it is like such a personal journey, and like it just happens differently for kind of everyone, and like so many things are things you can't really control. So I think the advice would be like to, if you really love it and want to do it and feel like it feels very like purposeful to you, I think then that's a very good sign. And I think that you just have to kind of keep doing that. And then by like, doing this like shitty open mic in a club, I like didn't know that it was being filmed, and then I didn't know that film would be sent to this manager, and then that manager eventually got me, like all these things are like from just me being out there like doing it kind of as much as possible, and saying yes to every bad show that I've ever been offered, and like asking to do all these shows, and just sort of never I guess my advice would be like always say yes to every opportunity. and
Clearly, I mean, you're here, so.
yeah. I mean, see, it works out. And now I have fucking 1,000 new fans. It's gonna be great. And I think just, and also like be a normal person or whatever, because I think some comics can get fucking insane and totally forget that their lives are not as interesting as they think they are or something. I don't know. I just feel like comics in general have a tendency to be insane people, so if you can be a little bit grounded and stuff, that will help you a lot, I'm sure.
Well, thanks a lot for saying yes to my shitty show and Q&A. We appreciate you taking your own advice on those things.
There you go.
And if anyone has one last final thing to get in, we'll wrap it up. All right.
Say something.
Well, we can edit this off later. So, yeah, thanks, Nick. This was awesome.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Glad you made it out.
Me too. I appreciate you guys, or you asking me to do it, and you guys all coming to watch and ask questions. It's very nice.
And everyone has to listen to the album now. Full playthrough.
You gotta fucking listen to that album, man. You're gonna learn so much about comedy if you listen to that album.
The pursuit of comedy can you ruin your life too?
Exactly, yeah. Take it as a warning. Listen to it and never do comedy again.
If there's one thing I took away from this was I'm never gonna do comedy again.
Yeah, that's good. That's the message I want to get out there.